Number one would be the state abandonment of community colleges. I referred to this in our discussion with Ted Mitchell the other day, but I think what's going on right now is huge and is frequently the case about community college issues. It's not getting the play it deserves. In Arizona, the state just adopted a budget that zeroed out state support for two community colleges, Pima and Maricopa Community Colleges. Collectively, they educate more than 250,000 students. Most of those students are first generation students. They are overwhelmingly Latino and other minority students. Historically, the model for state finance of community colleges has been a one-third, 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 state, local tuition. This has fallen apart, nowhere perhaps more than Arizona. And I think we collectively, I'm going to talk in a minute about Sweetbriar, but whereas the national press had sort of an amazing focus on Sweetbriar, which was educating maybe 700 students, it is really appalling how little there has been outrage over and sort of intense coverage over completely zeroing out state support for some community colleges. Colleges in trouble, who to look at. I get a lot of calls, and I got more after Sweetbriar. People want to know which college is going to go under, who should be on death watch. And I get people tips now. Actually, post Sweetbriar really did have a psychological impact on academe from random faculty members who say, "I'm afraid we're about to be the next Sweetbriar." And I ask why, and they'll, sometimes there's not much evidence. It's like we didn't get a raise this year, but lots of colleges didn't give their faculty members raises this year. But in others, some of which we're looking out, there are indeed really dangerous signs. So who to look out at in your readership area for your covering. One is small liberal arts colleges or women's colleges like Sweetbriar, but a few cautions there. One, there are small liberal arts colleges, if you look at your Williams, Swarthmores, or small women's colleges, if you look at your Barnards and Bryn Mawrs, that aren't going anywhere. They're doing very well, attracting a lot of students. And so the idea that all liberal arts colleges or all women's liberal arts colleges are going to disappear, I don't think is true. But if you use Sweetbriar as an example, places that have significant gains year after year in their discount rate are really the ones you should look at. And what's important, and what Sweetbriar is a good illustration of, is Sweetbriar had rising applications for the last 5 years. And colleges love to issue the press releases at the application deadline, say, applications up 12%, up 13%. What Sweetbriar illustrates is that isn't necessarily a good sign, because Sweetbriar's enrollment was flat and then going down, even though their discount rate, so they were basically throwing money at students, trying to bribe them to come. So that is, if you want to think about who should you look at, who should ask questions about, it's a place with relatively small enrollment, discount rate going up, enrollment not. Particularly those under, say, 1,200, 1,000 in enrollment, they tend to be higher risk institutions unless they have $1 billion endowment, and most of them don't. Affirmative action coming under attack, and college admissions coming under attack. About a month from now, I don't know exactly when, the Supreme Court will either grant or reject an appeal of an affirmative action case coming out of the University of Texas. If this seems like deja vu, it's because it's the same case they looked at 2 years ago. 2 years ago, they sent it back to the lower court for review. The lower court has now reviewed it, and it's being appealed back up to the Supreme Court. There are various theories on whether the justices will take the case or not. Some believe that the justices might just be sick of the topic by now. If I had to bet, I would bet they will take the case, because I do not see 5 justices on the current Supreme Court who are solid votes for the continued use of affirmative action. If they take this case, there will be a huge national debate about it. In the University of Texas case that didn't settle the issue 2 years ago was over whether colleges have the right to consider race and ethnicity if there are other things in Texas, the 10% plan, that can achieve some level of diversity. If the Supreme Court rules, and it could, that colleges just flat out can't consider race and ethnicity, that is a huge story for every one of you. It is not just Texas, it's not just public colleges, because it would apply to private colleges that receive federal aid and that give out their own money with as well. It would also probably apply to financial aid. Now, more beyond just the question of will there be any diversity, this is coming at a time that there's a lot of interest and concern about the state of college admissions. I would urge you to stop doing stories on hysterical suburban kids who applied to 25 colleges and didn't get into Stanford. I think we've done that, and I also don't think that's really where the action is. But we are looking at a lot of big changes. The ACT has changed. The SAT is in the process of changing. Whenever you have the big national players in testing change, you're going to have a lot of attention. If affirmative action is curtailed, I suspect you will see many more colleges go test optional, which is going to be a huge issue. And whatever you think about that, I think that's going to be a big change, because that is one of the few strategies colleges have successfully used to date. Who runs colleges with big-time college sports? So this idea is based on a story we ran recently, prompted by the naming of several university presidents at schools with big-time sports and big-time sports scandals, who picked presidents who have no experience in athletics. So, for example, the University of Miami named a very distinguished scholar of public health. He's the dean of the Harvard School of Public Health. Before that, he was Minister of Health in Mexico. And he's going to be taking Donna Shalala's place at the University of Miami. The University of Oregon, which also has a lot of athletics issues, named, not in any way to insult our host university, the University of Chicago, but named the law dean from the University of Chicago as its next president. Now, University of Chicago law deans don't tend to know much about NCAA rules. And this matters. If you look at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, home to one of the biggest sports scandals in recent years, it took place under Holden Thorpe, or some of it took place in the sort of collapse under Holden Thorpe, who was a really interesting academic president. He fled, and he's now provost at Wash U, which doesn't have Division I athletics. Syracuse University, which is having a huge, again, an academic scandal related to athletics. Their president was the law dean at Wash U, again, not an experience from which he would know athletics. He said recently he is spending 50% of his time on athletics. Presidential campaign, we're having a 19-month presidential campaign, and that's just assuming it's starting now. Some would say it's been going on for a while. And the issues in higher ed. And already we've seen just a few glimmers of things that I would suggest you continue to watch as we go on. Hillary Clinton, on her tour of a community college in Iowa, was asked a question about financial aid. She talked about aid at community colleges. She then went on, and I thought it was very interesting because she wasn't asked about for-profit colleges, but she went on to criticize for-profit colleges, which was interesting because it wasn't clear that she would have that point of view. But what you see is issues in higher ed are big political issues. The Obama administration has had a series of intense fights with the for-profit sector, and we heard Steve Gunderson express his frustration about that here earlier. So that's one question. The other question is the issue of student debt. Debt has become a really big political issue and a popular issue to talk about. But I would urge you to be cautious about it. We've started a feature called On the Stump, in which we analyze the various statements made. And Paul Fain, my colleague in the corner there, wrote about Marco Rubio, gave a speech, and we talked about how, you can't graduate from college these days without a lot of debt. And he cited his own experience graduating with $100,000 in debt. But what's interesting is if you look at Rubio, he had a football scholarship in his first year. He went to a community college in his second year. He was an in-state university student for the junior and senior years. Then he went to an expensive law school. And so when he says he has $100,000 in debt, there are a lot of false reports about, like, you can't graduate from college these days without $100,000 in debt. The average figure is actually in the mid to high 20s. And it's not to say that having $28,000 in debt isn't a problem. It's a big problem for lots of students. But I would encourage you, as we enter this period of rhetoric, to ask things like, where did the debt come from? What does it really mean? That going to an expensive private law school results in a lot of debt may not really be the way to determine higher education policy.